Partly because that's sort of the first moment in the novel when you sense the tension between the way that Hazel imagines what a life is supposed to be, what a life well lived is supposed to be, what a successful life looks like, and the way that Augustus imagines it. Hazel gives Augustus this literary novel called An Imperial Affliction, and Augustus gives Hazel this, shoot-'em-up novelization in which this guy named Staff Sergeant Max Mayhem kills 119 people in 221 pages. And that idea of heroism, that idea that a life well lived involves these grand acts of sacrifice, generally like, jumping on a grenade to save your buddies, or, dying because committing suicide because the great love of your life is unavailable to you because the Montagues and the Capulets have some disagreements, or whatever it is. The romantic epics, particularly the star-crossed romantic epics of our history, tend to be lived on this huge scale. I always think of Odysseus returning from finally getting back at the end of the Odyssey, right? Do you guys know what I'm going to say? Okay. Finally gets back at the end of the Odyssey, and here are all these dudes hanging out with his wife, eating his food, and like the rivers run with blood. And that is our satisfying ending. But in fact, let me submit to you that is an inappropriate reaction to returning home and finding that your wife has suitors. You've been gone a long time, dude. She had no word of you. And these big romantic star-crossed epics that we read about, they shape the way that we imagine how lives are supposed to be lived and what constitutes a successful life and what constitutes a heroic life. And these kids in this novel don't have that kind of heroism available to them. But neither do most of us. And the struggle that Augustus and Hazel both face is finding a way to live a good and valuable life in a world that often tells us that lives cannot be good and valuable unless they are either long or sacrificially heroic. So I wanted to write, when I started out The Fault in Our Stars, which was almost 12 years ago, I wanted to write a little epic. I wanted to write a little love story that wouldn't be about, the Montagues and the Capulets at war. It wouldn't be about war at all. It wouldn't be about family or politics. It would be about disease and the way that it shapes and circumscribes our life. And hopefully, my goal in writing that story would be to find a way to celebrate all kinds of lives and to argue that many kinds of lives, including ones that are not as long as they ought to be, can be beautiful and can be valuable. So that was a lot of what inspired this story. The other thing that I want to say before I bring out my brother is that when I started working on this story, I had just finished working as a student chaplain at a children's hospital in Ohio, which I did for about 5 months right after I graduated from college. And during that time, I met a lot of sick kids and spent a lot of time with sick kids, and they were nothing like my expectation, which was to meet these, sad but wise-eyed children who knew the secrets of life, who just stared deeply enough into their pupils or whatever. And because I had been given that expectation by generations and generations of novels about sick people. And the truth of what I encountered, at least, was that people who are sick are very much like people who are well, except that they are sick. And And that was really, really important for me in writing this novel. But that said, I spent 8 years between 2000 and 2008 failing at writing it. And along the way I wrote some other books, but every time I would finish something I would come back to what I called the hospital story, and I would try to write it again. It was a funny book. It was about this dashingly handsome but alcoholic hospital chaplain. All the positive influence he had on all these kids. And I would send it to my editor, and she would be like, "This is all right, but can we get rid of the chaplain?" And I'd be like, "Absolutely not." And it wasn't until I became friends with a nerdfighter named Esther Earl that I was finally able to write the story, because Esther was sick and has since died, but it wasn't so much her illness that allowed me a way into the story. It was meeting a genuinely empathetic teenager. I don't mean that as an insult to you, but I'm not empathetic either, and I'm in my 30s. So, but to meet someone who is able to turn outward in the way that Hazel is was the key revelation to being able to write this story. To meet someone who could have an honest awareness of her surroundings in the way that Hazel does, and that was the key. And then the book, it was only 3 quick years from there. And I'm going to answer a lot of questions about The Fault in Our Stars tonight and talk more about it. But right now, I feel like this topic that I've been talking about heroism and how we live heroic lives is perhaps best discussed in song.